pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. Suzette, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Burns,
Present.
Mr. Becker,
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser, here, Mr. Keller,
Here.
Ms. Deal, here, Mrs. Carr, here, Mr. Sickich,
Present.
Mrs. Lee, here, President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any modifications to the agenda this evening?
We have no modifications.
Okay, well, with that, we'll move right into our public budget hearing. So annually, as a requirement by the state of Wisconsin, our school district will hold a public budget hearing to go over the proposed budget for the 22, in this instance, 22-23 school year. This is an opportunity for the public to see what is being proposed for our budget for the current school year, ask questions if they have any, and those questions can be addressed throughout the process before we pass the final budget in late October of this year. Over the last several years, the district has taken a lot of time and effort to get our finances in order, and we have been successful in that regard, I would like to say. We've been able to increase our credit rating significantly from junk status to preferred status. We were able to put over $34 million into our Fund 10 account, which allows us to not have to do short-term borrowing, which saves the taxpayers interest that we would have to pay in order to make payroll each month, which is a common thing that districts have to do because payments from the state are not sent every month. They are sent in 3 large chunks over the course of the year, but we have to pay everyone on time every pay period. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to our Director of Finance, Mr. Aaron Norris.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for having me this evening. So just welcome you to our annual budget hearing for the 22-23 school year. As Noah said, the annual public budget hearing is mandated by the state of Wisconsin for all public school districts. And this evening we'll be going through our current budget at a high level to overview how schools are funded. And then we'll dive into the different funds that make up the budget. So with that, I really wanted to start this evening with our mission statement before we kind of dove into the budget. Mission, because to me, it really is the driving force which helps guide us and through our work on a daily basis and annual basis. So our mission, as you know, every day at the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District focuses on equity through deeper learning, fosters a sense of belonging, and educates the whole child so that each learner achieves success. I also wanted to thank our dedicated school board who is here tonight with us. We want to thank you for the work on all the pieces that go into the district's budget. You know, this process starts very, very early the year before, and there's many different stops along the way, from enrollment projections to open enrollment to the preliminary budget workshop 1 to the preliminary workshop 2 prior to the preliminary budget approval. So just really want to thank you for your work in the process, and also, you know, how it also connects to our strategic planning processes that we've done throughout the year as well. So thank you to that. Yeah. Also want to thank our administrative team for all the time and ongoing collaboration that they have on this process as well. On behalf of our students and families, their ability to remain centered to the school board's approved strategic plan with a focus on equity and inclusion allows us to be transparent and collaborative with the budget process. So the annual hearing is really an extension of the preliminary budget. I mentioned that earlier. And so that was approved this past spring. There are a number of reasons why the budget you're seeing today isn't the final product. And really, they're all tied to this slide here. And so the numbers that we have currently are essentially projections from the prior year and leading up through the summer, where we receive projections in equalized property value, we get certification projections, but none of it's really certified. And I'll get into that in a few slides later. And really it starts with the third Friday count, which is this Friday. And so our revenue limit authority is established by our membership, our enrollment at the schools. And that happens on the 16th. It's certified by the state of Wisconsin on October 1st. And then on the 15th, we receive final state aid calculations. Really then, as Noah mentioned, late October 24th is the final budget approval. And then we send the tax levy certifications to the municipalities on November 4th. So really, the ball starts rolling on the 16th this Friday. So some revisions just to note from the prelim budget to today, and that's really as information comes in. I like to try to get as much updated information here tonight for you as possible. But as I mentioned, none of it will be certified until beginning in the few weeks coming ahead. So just some things to note about tonight's presentation are that updated equalization aid values have been updated for tonight's meeting. Updated preliminary equalized property value numbers have been updated. That impacts our mill rate. Same with equalization aid, and then adjusted AGR revenue and updated federal revenue through ESSER and flow through. So really to kind of get into it, the revenue limit formula is essentially how school districts are funded and receive nearly all their funding for from the state of Wisconsin for school district funding. The formula that I have here today represents about 90% of total funding. I think it's helpful to start with the formula without numbers because it kind of gives a sense to how we receive funding from the state. So really, like I said before, the 16th, this Friday, we'll start the third Friday in September membership count. And really what happens when we receive those numbers from the state, we take the membership for that year on a 3-year average, multiplied by the per pupil amount, which is set by the state. And that's what we talk about in a biennial budget around the state giving us more money per pupil. The more money we get per kid, multiplied by the number of members, results in more funding for the school district here. Then we add in one-time non-recurring exemptions, and then we add in recurring exemptions, and that gives us the total revenue limit authority. So to kind of give you some numbers around what this looks like here for us. This year, our projected resident member FTE, which is going to be the 3-year average, right? So the past 2 years plus this year averaged out over 3 years, multiplied by 10,500 plus our one-time recurring exemptions, which include our declining enrollment exemption, our energy efficiency, our private school voucher, and our hold harmless voucher or hold harmless exemption, plus ongoing recurring exemption, which is 0, equals $90,976,304. To give you some sense around the one-time non-recurring exemptions, so around $3.5 million is going to be declining enrollment and hold harmless. Around just over 4 million is going to be your private school voucher, and just under 2 million is going to be energy efficiency.
What's hold harmless?
So hold harmless is essentially a clause from the state that allows them to hold you harmless from year to year. So if our revenue last year was 100 and this year it's 80, they'll make up the difference for the next year to keep you whole from year to year. It allows districts similar to declining enrollment to kind of right size their spending as their revenue subsides year after year. So as our enrollment starts to not see huge cliffs and starts to level off, these exemptions will fall off, because as our enrollment levels off, we'll have less of a gap in revenue every year, and then we'll see which will result in less of a hold harmless clause.
Okay.
Yep. So the per pupil amount, just have a couple notes here to make on this. The per pupil amount is an amount that was set in stone for each school district when revenue limits were enacted in 1993. Each biennial budget, we learn that the state will be increasing this per pupil number by any certain dollar amount. The last 2 years, we've received no increase from the state of Wisconsin. And as you're all aware, that puts strains on a school district budget, especially in times of inflation, which we're in now through purchase services, through our own, staff salaries and benefits, things like that. Every other area of our budget tends to increase in times like these. And that's not abnormal. And so, this year it's a $0 per pupil increase. So we look forward to hearing kind of what the state legislature and the governor's office intend to do for the following biennial budget. Just something to note there. So in kind of going back here, so our total revenue limit authority, kind of that amount dictates it impacts our levy. And so this is kind of how it's all tied together. So we take the total revenue limit authority and we review it based on how much aid we get from the state of Wisconsin. So our total revenue limit authority is just under $91 million. We expect to receive around $56.5 million in aid. And so essentially the revenue limit authority subtracting aid equals the total tax levy. And so the aid certification happens in October. And so when the state of Wisconsin with local municipalities and county and local municipalities comes out with equalized property value, which I'll talk about in a second, it has an impact on aid. And so if your equalized property value increases more than the average statewide, you will receive less aid the following year because you're considered a more property rich district. If your equalized property value increases less than the state average, then you'll receive more aid. So essentially over the years, we've seen a decrease in the levy to the community for a couple reasons. One, we've had declining enrollment, right? The less students you have, the less revenue you have. Well, that impacts the revenue limit authority, right? And then as well, we've seen an increase in aid. So if A minus B equals C, if A is decreasing and B is increasing, then C is going to be decreasing, right? And so we've seen the total tax levy decreasing in, gradually over the past, I would say 10 years. Okay. So at this point, our total allowable tax levy is $34,391,806. Okay, so this is kind of all the pieces that go into the total school-based tax levy. So I kind of mentioned the 34 million here. So the revenue limit tax levy it consists of Fund 10, Fund 38, and Fund 41. So Fund 10, essentially we take the $34,391,806 and we subtract out our annual debt payments. So this year we expect to pay $3,318,510, which comes out of our Fund 10 property tax levy. So when that debt is paid off, Fund 38 is non-referendum debt. When that debt's paid off, those dollars will come back into Fund 10. So that's why in 2021, when we refinanced our debt, it helped us both within the revenue limit and outside of the revenue limit. So the two pieces there are the energy efficiency debt we have, which that refinance directly went right back into the community. We didn't see any return on that, right? And then in Fund 38, we did. By refinancing the debt, our interest payments, just like any one of our own debts that we might have, by refinancing, we were able to recover, I guess less payments and interest. So, and then also we then add in the Fund 80 community service levy, so that way you take the 34 million plus 3 equals the 37 million for the total school-based property tax levy. So once we have established the school-based tax levy, which is 37 million, just over 37 million, we then divide it by equalized property value. And as I mentioned before, the local county and municipality analysis has equalized property value for the West Allis, West Milwaukee community, as well as the areas of New Berlin and Greenfield at a 14.8% increase, which is probably not something that's shocking given the real estate market and things like that. Statewide, it's at 15%. So we're just slightly under that, which then, as I mentioned before, will help us in the following year with aid. So we'll actually get more aid because we're considered a slightly less rich property community. We won't know the exact final calculation until October 1st, but if the numbers from the state were to be at 16%, that would have no impact here on us, but it would have impacts in future budgets for equalized for equalization aid. Sorry about that. It should be noted that these factors are really not controlled by the district, but it just compares how we compare to other school districts and municipalities in the state. Yeah, so really they take the total tax-based levy divided by equalized property value multiplied by 1,000. That gives us the mill rate, and that's going to be, $612 for every $1,000 worth of value is the total portion of the property tax bill towards the school district, and that's how we figure out what each taxpayer pays. Okay, the revenue limit authority over time. So I really like this chart because one of the questions that I always get asked, or in my head I ask, is how is our revenue limit increasing as membership is declining, right? And so a reason for that is it's mainly because since 2012, all the way up until 2021, you've seen a couple different things. one, in that 10-year period of time, the per pupil amount has increased. Substantially. I'm not sure the best word to use for that, but it's increased along with our declining enrollment exemptions that hold harmless, as Jane asked earlier. So those two reasons that contributes to your revenue limit. Now, as I mentioned before, as enrollment starts to level off, those exemptions and clauses start to their impact on your budget start to decrease. So if you look here in 2021 to 21-22, and then 21-22 to 22-23, you're seeing that decline. And that's for two reasons. One, we haven't seen an increase in per pupil dollars in the last budget. So 21-22 and 2023 is a $0 increase. And then also our declining enrollment exemption and hold harmless clause are starting to get minimally impact our budget. So a few years ago, they were, $4 or $5 million in some, and now they're under 3. And so that's kind of where we're at with that. And so, now if in 23-24, the legislature passes a increase to the per pupil, this number, this chart would then go back up again, right? And that's kind of, it's a good example of kind of how the state funds schools. This is a good chart, I think, just to better understand that. This is a different way to look at this. And so this compares how, and I kind of mentioned this before, but this compares how equalization aid impacts the levy. So it's the revenue limit authority subtracting equalization, it equals the total tax levy. So in blue, in dark blue here, you have over time our levy. And so it's not as easy to see, but you can kind of see that over time, our tax levy to the community has been decreasing. And that's for two main reasons. The first one is that we've had declining enrollment, right? And so we've essentially needed less money with less students, and the state's been supplementing that with more aid. So as the state increases aid, it decreases the levy. So when the state of Wisconsin says there's no increase to the revenue limit, but we'll give you more money with aid, the school district actually doesn't get any more money. It's a reduction to the community in the property tax levy, essentially. So you've seen here since really 2017, a large decrease in the amount that's levied and an increase in the equalization from the state. Okay, so how does this affect our mill rate? We kind of went into that a bit around, the property, the total levy divided by equalized value multiplied by 1,000 gives us the mill rate. And so this is the mill rate over time. And so the projected mill rate for this year is $6.12, as I mentioned before. That represents around an 18.5% decrease in the mill rate from last year to this year. So last year it was $7.55. And this year it's at $6.12. And really that's two main reasons. If the equalized property value maintained, it did not change from last year to this year, you'd still see an 8% decrease. However, given that we will see a decrease in membership again, along with a large increase in equalized property value, that's where the 18.5% comes up. So, but this shows over time. So really the 6.12, over the past 12 years is by far the lowest amount that the community has paid to the school district in that period of time. So. Okay, so now we're going to go through kind of each fund that the school district has to show where and how our funds are allocated. So Fund 10 is our general fund. The Fund 10 is used to record district financial activities for the current year operations. Kind of within Fund 10, we talk about Fund 21 and Fund 27. Fund 21 is special revenue, and it's a trust. It's it's primarily for gifts and donations. But there's also things, we record school club activities, funds for advisors and committees like that. Any school revenues from paid fees to books, things like that, grants. Some of the staff receive Coles, I forget the name of that, Coles teacher grants. So that gets recorded in 21. So it's kind of its own special, that's why it's special revenue, the state calls it, because that's kind of the function of it. It's kind of an other for the state of Wisconsin. And then Fund 27 is our special education fund for students with exceptional educational needs. So really on a day-to-day basis, our school district operates under Fund 10 and 27. So two main funds that we use. And that's kind of where a majority of the budget work is done. So this kind of breaks down Fund 10 and 27 revenues by source. So 26% of Fund 10 and 27 is local, including property tax. 57% is going to be state revenue, 5% open enrollment, and 12% federal grants, and then other remaining the rest. This shows our Fund 10 and 27 projected revenues. So once again, kind of this chart broken down by number here. I kind of made a note next to interdistrict payments, OEN. So that's a $6.3 million in open enrollment in revenue, right? Similarly, we have an open enrollment out expense as well. For membership, the school district of residents receives the revenue and then records it as an expense to a non-neighborhood school district. So for any student that lives here but attends a different district, we receive the membership and then we are billed for the expense. And so similarly, for students who open enroll in, we expect to receive that as revenue, not as in membership. And so that's kind of how it's why it's spelled out this way.
So in years past, you had said that they kind of washed each other out. Will that be the case this year again?
In terms of
As far
revenue,
as like students going in and out of the district, like we receive funds, but then we send out funds.
yeah.
Is it,
Open enrollment is it equal?
is it kind of,
Yeah, no, it doesn't wash itself out, so to say. This isn't the whole picture to it. We receive just over $6 million in revenue for students coming in, and then we pay out around a little over $10 million for students going out. What's hard to encapsulate is the amount we pay out isn't the total amount we receive. So for every student that we count as a member, we receive around $10,000 per pupil, $10,500. We only pay out around $8,000. So we receive around $2,000-ish per student, depending on if they're a regular ed or a special education student. And so the 6 million is a little bit closer to 8 for those students. So we are still net loss and open enrollment total though. Yeah. But it's not as easy as taking open enrollment revenue in minus open enrollment revenue out and going, this is the difference, because the revenue or the expense out isn't the total revenue we get. We get more per student than we pay out per student.
okay.
And that isn't the case with school vouchers. School vouchers, we pay out a higher percentage per student. And so, and I kind of mentioned that before, it's a little over, just under $5 million this year for private voucher students. So does that kind of make sense, Jane?
Yep.
Yeah.
That does.
So just some highlights to hit on here, kind of how the I guess kind of changes from year to year. Try to have a slide to kind of just overview of what things are different year to year. A lot of this stuff doesn't really change. It's, similar systems and processes. So 20-23, the budget this year includes a 4.7% CPI increase for returning staff, educational assistant and building substitute salary realignment, continued kind of progress with the comp model, which includes a $200 annual increase for returning professional educators. So if they're in year 2 of the comp model, they'll receive $400. So it's an annual addition to that. Additional compensation for retroactive micro-credentials. That is also base building, similar to the $200 increase. And then we also implemented a $1,000 teacher retention bonus. And so that is paid out twice over the year. So $500, I believe, was out last payroll, and it'll go out again in March. So for staff. It includes school building budgets receiving 75% of the allocation, which includes leadership and learning. The business office departments reduced as well. We're talking this year now about, Steve was here a few weeks ago talking about the Fund 46 plan. So we've begun using funds in Fund 46 for long-term capital improvement. So that the construction of the WAAC fields is built into the budget as well. The focus on equity and funding in schools of varying needs. That's the math curriculum that was tabled at the end of last year to be done this year. And then using ESSER to increase our Fund 46 transfer, which was board approved last spring. Just highlights here of the budget. Okay, sure, got everything there. So similar to revenues, kind of a breakdown of where we are, kind of by object here for Fund 10 and 27 expenses. So as you might guess, just under 80% or 70% of our budget is salary and benefits. So 46% salary, 21% benefits. Purchase services makes up 21%. So some examples of purchase services are going to be our transportation for both cabs and buses, utilities, open enrollment out would be built into that as well. Things like professional developments, things like that are kind of all built in right there. What's not in here is our transfers. Or I'm sorry, that's in here. Transfers. That's section, the 1%. That's going to include our fund 10 to 46 transfer, our fund 10 to 27 transfer. I don't think I mentioned that here. Yeah, I didn't mention that here. Sorry about that. The revenue and the expense piece, it does not include the fund 10 to 27 transfer because one is recorded as an expense. So the fund 10 to 27 transfer is an expense. And then fund 27 receiving the revenues, receiving the funds is a revenue. So it's very common. School districts have a fund 10 to 27 transfer. Most school districts that have a fund 27, which all do, receive about 28 to 30% of the revenue from the government to cover their expenses. So the additional 70% is covered by fund 10. And so I want to make a note of that here because it's recorded this way in each of the slides here. So that is that. So projected expenses kind of breaks it down here by fund 10 and 27. So similar to how I demonstrated the revenues, it's broken down here. So so fund 10 salaries and benefits about 67 million, purchase services 32, supplies 2 million. Capital objects are going to be objects that are planned to be purchased with a value of over $5,000. That's not like ordering $50,000 worth of computers. It's the object itself having one value of 5,000 or more. So at this point in time, we don't have any planned expenses that would range that high. And then other objects, so a total of 122 million. So just want to make some notes here on fund 10 and 27 revenues and expenses. So we kind of mentioned before, as Noah kicked us off here, that the final budget approvals in the end of October. So what are the things that might change we're working on from now until then? So the first thing is total fund 10 and 27 expenditures exceed total fund 10 and 27 revenues. The reason that is because we have around just under $2 million in AGR carryover. And so AGR is our achievement gap reduction. It's formerly SAGE. And so those are funds that is very interesting that the state, most grants, AGR is a grant, and most grants are allocated as you record the expense and book it, and then you receive a reimbursement from the state for the money back. AGR works the opposite way. AGR gives you the amount of money up front, and then it's yours to spend based on their criteria. And so it can be used for coaching of students in elementary schools. It can be to reduce class sizes to 18 to 1, and anything for those grades that would supplement reading and math. Okay, and so we have about just under $2 million of funds we haven't used from previous years. So that's what we're planning. We're trying to spend those funds down, and it's actually considered kind of assigned for those reasons. So we're trying to use those up in some of our buildings, elementary schools this year. The second thing is, I'm sure you saw on the board update that Governor Evers has pledged to commit an additional $90 million to schools. This is going to result in kind of two different pots here. So it's going to increase our per pupil amount this year for one-time funds, and also the Get Kids Ahead grant. So it'll be about $800,000 this year we'll receive. The question is among local school districts of when we're going to get it. And so we're trying to get clarity from DPI around when that'll be. But the belief is we will get it this year. So by the time the budget hearing in October happens, we should have clarity around that and a plan about what we'll be using it for. And then lastly, open enrollment for health insurance happens at the beginning of October. And so while the estimated savings from switching to WIA to UHC is around $850,000, you don't really know until people do open enrollment, right? If we have a huge increase in members taking insurance, that could easily be half of that. But we certainly will see some savings there. So as I get back to item 1 here, where I said that total expenditures exceed total revenues, I'm nearly positive that will not be the case given item 2 and 3 on this list, but more to come on that. Just wanted to make note of that. Yeah. Okay, so kind of the next thing here is our funds 38 and 39. So fund 38 is considered non-referendum debt service levy, and fund 39 is referendum debt service. So to kind of just jump in here, we currently, as I mentioned before, we currently have no fund 39 debt, which is referendum debt. And we have about 5 years left of fund 38 debt left to pay. And we'll talk about that in a second. But just to note here, expenses for fund 38 are based on the 22-23 fiscal year, and revenues are based on the 23 calendar year, which is why the revenues and expenses don't match. That's the reason why that is. So the way that I kind of always kind of reference it is once your, how does it go? Once your revenues exceed, or once your expenses exceed your revenues, it means your debt payments are declining, right? So our expenses exceed our revenues because our debt payments are almost done. And that's a good thing. So a lot of that is due to the refinance that the board had worked through in 2021, which is a great, interest rates were low. It was a great idea to do that at that point. Kind of mentioned we don't have any fund 39 debt here, but it shows our debt service tax levy. And so you can see here in light blue, our fund 39 debt was paid off in 17-18. And then in 18-19, 19-20, we increased fund 38 debt through a bond. And so we're working through that. This doesn't seem like it's almost paid off, but the next slide will show you that it really is. And so those are the remaining debt payments for the last, not including this year, the last 5 years. Yeah, nearing the end, it's really good news, I think. So, when we get to, 25, 26, the calendar year payments will nearly be subsided. And that'll be a savings. I just want to make a note, that'll be a savings for the district, but also the community. So half of our debt service payments are inside the revenue limit and half are outside. So the part that's outside is the energy efficiency piece. So the moment that that's paid off, the community will see, around a $1.5 to $2 million savings, in the levy. And then once we pay off the 38 debt that's inside the revenue limit, we'll see that money come right back into fund time. So I think that's really great. And I think there's been a lot of, work that's been done over the last few years of paying off debt that's callable. And by callable, some debt we could, if we could pay off all debt now, we could, but debt that's not callable means you're going to pay the interest no matter what. And so paying off debt that is callable is better. And that was done in 2021, a part of the refinance. And so that has really reduced the amounts, and if not cut off years from our future debt payments, which is great news.
So Aaron, you're saying that the stuff that we have left is not callable at this point?
At this point, we don't have any debt all the debt we have is callable. Yeah.
It is callable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much is the total amount that we have left on the current debt payments? Do you know that?
Not offhand,
Okay.
no.
I'd be interested to know what that is.
Yeah,
or dollar amount.
I can get that. Yeah, so I have here a note that when we refinance the debt for the energy efficiency piece, it resulted in saving taxpayers around $800,000. And then in prepaying our debt or defeasing debt, however way you look at that, it saved our school district around $200,000 by just by refinancing. So it was a really good move, around $1 million. So I think Noah mentioned this too around our interest rates and kind of financial stability. So when the refinance was occurring, we had to get an updated credit rating to be able to refinance debt. And so our rating jumped from, a non-investment grade speculative bond into a high grade according to S&P. So it shows that we're in a really good spot. 58% of the school districts in the state are at that, and the other remaining 42% are not. So it's a really good place to be. It's a sign of really good fiscal health on behalf of the school district and the school board. And it takes years to get there. And, just kind of bringing this together a bit, when a school district has a low fund balance, the only way to build a fund balance is to run a surplus budget. And we talked about this before. So if you run a surplus budget, you essentially get less aid from the state. And so it's a compounding problem. So having a fund balance that's healthy, where you don't have to short-term borrow, like Noah had mentioned, really sets yourself up to keep getting as much equalization aid as you can get from the state, because it essentially continues to reduce the burden off the community. And so maintaining a healthy fund balance allows you to not have to plan for future expenses in terms of building an even larger fund balance when you can put money away in different areas. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. When was the last time the Moody's rating was evaluated? I feel like we've been hanging around A2 for a while.
Yeah, this was done in 2021.
Okay.
So we don't annually do that
Okay.
unless, the reason this occurred at that point in time was because we were refinancing.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was just curious.
No, absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so moving to Fund 46, which is our long-term capital improvement trust fund. We just had talked about this a few weeks ago with Steve. So our annual transfer is $325,000 this year, part of the $5 million ESSER transfer. So we had moved around 3.7 million last year and last fiscal year from Fund 10 to 46 through ESSER, and this year around 1.3. So that combined is 5 million. And then the 1.3 plus the annual 325,000 transfer gets you to 1.6. And then part of the Fund 46 long range plan, excuse me, is around $3 million in expenses this year. To show you kind of the balance here. So the beginning fund balance is 13 million roughly, including revenues this year of 1.6 million, subtracting out the 3 million expenses gives you an ending fund balance at the end of the year of just under $12 million. So that shows you kind of where we've been able to save, and I think it shows we're in a really good place to plan for long-term capital improvement. So kind of mentioned that. So the 5-year clock is up this year. So that's kind of where we've been able to do. I just want to make a note of that. Yeah, I think it's a good example of how long-term planning can really help a school district. So, yeah. Okay, Fund 50. So Fund 50 is our food service fund, and Fund 50 is probably the most regulated fund that we have in the school district. It's under federal purview. So pretty much any dollar we receive in Fund 50, similar to how the board assigns fund balance, it is highly assigned by the federal government to be used purposely for food service related items. So any dollar we have in the Fund 50 balance sheet has to directly be spent on food service related item or needs. Just kind of jump in here. So one thing to note here, kind of an update. So we moved to having all school CEP this year, which is community eligibility provision, which means that any student in our school district this year can eat breakfast or lunch for free. One of the things we've been working on with the schools through online registration, the process is to incentivize and to get the messaging out to families that you still need to complete a sharing form. And what the sharing form is, it allows the school district to receive, for you to complete the form, for us to receive what your income level is a family, so we can reduce or remove your school fees at the school level. So the free and reduced application doesn't solely allow that to happen. And so this year, by removing the free and reduced application, it allows the online registration process to be much easier and cleaner. And the sharing form, I believe, is 1 page. I have to check. I believe it's 1 page. So.
And you did talk to us about that. And how did that go? How was the response?
It seems that many more families have been filling it out. But we still have some work to do on that. So we're trying to, not every family completes online registration. So we have the school send out messages. We have one-on-one meetings the schools can do with families, computers in the offices. And then at this point of the year, once the school year gets rolling, then if the main office starts to hand call the families, schedule time. So usually by about October, they've all completed it.
Mhm.
And at this point, honestly, the sharing form part, it's fine that happens late because school fees can be assessed any time of the year. The free and reduced application part is the one where you don't want families having kids not eating for free if they could have been. But now that all students are free, there really is no issue there. But generally by mid-year last year, by most years, every family had completed it within reason. So that's that. So revenues and expenses. So typically our Fund 50, we'd seen revenues exceeding expenses, meaning that we'd have a surplus in Fund 50. DPI really, it's frowned upon from them to have a Fund 50 balance sheet. And so they allow districts to have a 3-month operating expense balance sheet. Now that they've never enacted anything to take funds away from school districts. But that was part of the reason why we talked about moving to CEP, to try to spend some of the funds in our balance sheet. For what reason? And we all agreed that was a good reason to really allow students and families to have that access. Even so, the projections we have around our revenues around Fund 50 with all school CEP still show that we have a balanced budget in Fund 50. And so while that is good news to some degree, it still shows that, you know, we're trying to work through how to use Fund 50 funds that are highly assigned to help families and kids. And so still some work to do here. You can see our beginning fund balance is just over $2 million, just under $2.5 million. With revenues and expenses balancing, it would remain the same. It's still to be determined. We haven't received our community eligibility percentage yet from the state of Wisconsin. Given that we're new, we're going to be one of the last ones to receive that. But essentially what happens is the state of Wisconsin gives us a percentage of the number of students who are directly certified by the state of Wisconsin. And the easiest way to think about what that means is how many families in our community that attend our schools receive state benefits. And so they're considered directly certified, meaning they don't have to fill out any free and reduced application form to receive the benefit. They get it automatically. So then they take that number, multiply by a percentage that they get. I think they have one pot of money. So they figure out how that ratio is going to be. They multiply and they give you a percentage. And so what happens is we believe that projected number to be 80% from our initial calculations from the state. So we receive 80% of students at the free rate and the rest are at the paid rate. So really what happens is, why would we receive less revenue? Because no one would be paying for anything. So it's a reduction in local source revenue. So where families would pay for lunch, that now they won't have to. And so that's really the reduction. So. Okay, lastly here is Fund 80. And so Fund 80 is our community service fund, and it's used to record transactions related to the use of the district property for civic purposes, and programs include adult education, community recreation, and or care services. Some of the pictures just from the updated rec center. And so revenues and expenses similar to the last funds. You know, the 3 million here is the levy for that I showed before, and then in revenues, Fund 80 takes in around $1 million in revenue, and that's held true the last few years. And so revenues and expenses here balance, and that's kind of it. So the fund balance here in Fund 80, they have just under $4 million fund balance with revenues and expenses balancing. That would remain the same. Okay, so the last part here we're going to go through is, and I've talked about this a bit earlier here, is the projected tax levy. So the Fund 10 levy is just over 31 million. The Fund 38 for our debt payments is just over 3 million. That takes us to a total revenue limit levy of $34,391,806. When you include the $3 million Fund 80 levy, that takes us to a total $37,391,806. For reference, I have it here. The total levy last year was $40,226,577. So that total would be around just under a $3 million decrease in the levy. So that would come directly from the community. The tax levy breakdown here. So 83% of it goes to Fund 10, the general fund, 9% is the Fund 38, and 8% is community service. It just kind of takes the three areas and breaks it down by distribution here. So the majority goes to Fund 10, and then the other two pieces are debt service and community service. And this is kind of what I was showing before. So this shows the levy over time. And so you can see that there's a 7% decrease in the levy from last year to this year. And that is solely due to, declining membership and increased aid. It's those two reasons. As membership declines and aid increases, the levy decreases. And then the mill rate, as I showed in the earlier slide. So just under 19% decrease in the mill rate. So areas of continued budget consideration. So we have estimates of projected membership that will become real here in 3 weeks. We'll have a really good idea of what that's going to be likely by the mid next week. Families, just for your note, families have families can be counted, as members if they show up to school on Friday. And if they miss Friday, then they have to either have gone to school one day before and one day after. So if a family has not been enrolled ever and they show up next week, Monday, we receive no funding for them this year. So really it's trying very hard to get every family that's going to be enrolled in our schools to be enrolled before third Friday. At the very latest, enroll Thursday or Friday morning so we can get them to school. And so that's kind of how that works. So we'll work on, getting membership, certified by the state and get that in. That will be an area of that really kind of gets the ball rolling with the budget process. Getting certified numbers to the state in terms of aid and revenue, getting an updated private voucher amount, which then all of that together gets us the total levy, and then working through our personnel budget. And then other things that we kind of mentioned before is, trying to get a clearer picture on when the funds that Governor Evers talked about a few weeks ago are coming through, and then continued planning for district programs. So that's kind of the things we'll be working on the next few weeks prior to the final budget approval in October. And that is all I have, which was a lot.
That's thorough.
Thank you for listening.
Well done, Aaron.
Aaron, next time, if you go in a little bit more detail, I would appreciate that. Just some notes.
I'm making that note, more detail.
Kristen,
It's only 7:49. ESSER funding, where is that in this? Do we still have ESSER funding moving forward? I know there'll be questions folks will ask. I know it's a one-time thing. We can't use, we don't want to be using it long-term, but is there ESSER funding still involved in this process?
Yeah, there is. So we have, this year is the last year for ESSER 2, and then we have, I believe, ESSER 3. They
right.
changed the words on them. I'd have to look, but ESSER 3 extends, I believe, through 24, 25.
Okay.
So I have to double check on that. And the 90 million that Evers has said via his press release would go to 25, 26. It's not nearly the same, not nearly as monumental an amount as what was released in ESSER Gear 1 and then ESSER 2 and 3. So we do have funds available per the plan that we approved with the board. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
other questions? Or comments regarding Kristen?
I want to kind of make sure this is a public information that we don't assess home values. That's done by a separate through the city, correct?
City.
So I want to make sure people understand that it's not us valuating homes. And that's something I've heard before. We just put a tax levy on what we can do and use that long formula, because often someone will say, oh, you raised my taxes on my home. I did not. That's coming from a separate entity. I want to make sure people understand that, that piece of it.
Yeah, that's correct, Kristen.
Right, the increases in property tax value also helps decrease the mill rate, right?
Right.
Because if we're richer property wise, it'll reduce the mill rate.
Right.
But if your property value goes up, you still might be paying the same amount or more. But
Right.
again, generally, if your property value is worth more, that's a good thing for you personally.
Yeah.
Because then if you want to sell that property, you'll get more money for it. But yes, so the property tax evaluation is a very important part of this formula that we have nothing to do with and are only using it as a essentially actuarial point that we use to determine what we can actually levy.
Right. Right.
Anything else? All right, well then we'll open up the public comments then for anyone who might be watching via Zoom. So these public comments are specifically regarding the budget presentation that was just given by Mr. Norris. And so if there's anyone either in the room or who is watching via Zoom who would like to ask any questions or have any comments regarding the budget, now is your opportunity to do so. There should be a link in the chat. I see one person. Mr. Ryle, I presume your comments are not regarding this? Yes, it was. Yes.
Yep.
Mhm. Not seeing anyone signed up. So if anyone's on Zoom who wanted to make any comments regarding the budget, there is a link in the chat to do so. So make sure everyone has an opportunity. All right, seeing none, we'll close public comments on the budget hearing at this point. Again, if someone has questions later on, this is not a passed budget at this point. It will not be passed until the end of October for anyone who arrived late. And so if there are any questions or comments, you can certainly reach out to us and we could address those at that time. So Mr. Norris, I'll turn over to you for any final comments you might have regarding the budget.
So, well, thank you again. So as Noah kind of mentioned, the scheduled final budget hearing is slated for October 24th. At that time, we will have at that point, hopefully very minimal changes, assuming our projections are as close as possible. But believe them to be very accurate. So at that time, everything will have come through from the state of Wisconsin. And so, but yeah, I just want to thank you for all your input and all the time that you spent with us.
What date is what date is that again, the final?
October 24th.
24th?
24th,
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, thank you again. So.
6.3, Mr. Broadwell.
I'm sorry, what? There's a secondary public comments for everything else that you'll see in the normal
Yeah,
time
yeah,
frame. Yes.
yep.
Let's keep on reading. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Norris.
Thank you.
So we'll close the public hearing now for the budget. At this point, we'll move on to item 7, which is the superintendent's report.
Great. Before I get started with 7.1, the legislative update, I also want to thank Aaron. This was his first big heavy lift with the budget hearing. So great job. I appreciate it. Yep.
Thank you.
I know it's a lot. Thanks for everybody hanging in there with it. So legislative update. So we've heard a little bit about this in the budget hearing, but so on September 6th, Governor Evers and State Superintendent of Public Instruction Jill Underly released their K-12 education state budget plan that focuses on improving reading and literacy outcomes, expanding access to student mental health services and school nutrition, providing financial literacy and out-of-school programming, addressing the staffing shortages to help keep class sizes small and increasing per pupil and special education aids, while holding the line on property taxes. So we get a sense of kind of where they're prioritizing, because budgets aren't just about money, they're also really about priorities. And so it gives us some sense of where the governor and our state superintendent are starting to envision where we move in public education. Then the governor also announced, like Aaron had shared, the release of $90 million in federal funds for school districts. And I won't read this whole thing again because he walked us through that. To us, it amounts to about $800,000, and we're waiting to get a little more guidance on what that can or cannot be used for, but probably aligns well with the priorities I mentioned earlier. And then at the federal level, September 12th is a deadline to submit comments on proposed changes to federal Title IX regulations. So there's new work to update the regulations so that they are currently, the recommendations or proposals are subject to public comment opportunity for districts and other interested parties to submit feedback to influence the final version of the regulation, so that submitting comments is due on September 12th. And then 7.2 is our Board of Education recognitions at Central High School. Over the last few months, Central students have been raising funds to support those affected in Ukraine. At Central, we would like to acknowledge the Spanish Honor Society for all the students involved who participated in the sales, the special education classes for allowing us to set up and sell in their space, and all of the International Love Club students for planning, organizing, selling, setting up, cleaning up, and spending personal time preparing for this event. All of our student groups should be very proud of their efforts and support in this fundraiser led by the International Love Club students. From communication, Dr. Stewart would like to thank Amanda Schwittenberg from the Recreation Department, who made the balloon arches at opening day, so our big teacher opening day kickoff. She went above and beyond to make them during her free time to make opening day festive for our staff. I'd also like to thank Jordan Pollard, Brandon Shumich, and David Curran for their help coordinating the technology for opening day, as well as Andrea Watkins and Tess Thomas for capturing photo and video. Also last week, we had a virtual 4K information night, and I'd like to thank Principal Gosh for facilitating the event and answering our families' questions. And then from Recreation, Shelley Strasser, Director of Rec, would like to thank and recognize Bobby Foreman for organizing the second annual Cuts for Kids event on Monday, August 29th. The event provides kids with a haircut, backpack full of school supplies, and lunch. This is all made possible by our great community partners and sponsors. This year's event served over 150 kids and help to alleviate some back-to-school financial stress for parents and is sending kids back to school ready to learn and feeling good about themselves. The event garnered positive media attention for the district and recreation department from CBS 58, Fox 6, and Spectrum News. And they did a nice job covering it. It was really cool what happened. So thanks to recreation for that. And then 7.3 in the superintendent's report, some quick updates and information items. So there were no public comments to follow up on from our meeting on August 22nd. And then a little bit about the launch of the new school year. So the start of the new school year really has gone really well. This probably is the strongest start in my 8 years being in the role with our school district. You know, we had some of the typical transportation challenges, but nothing like we've experienced in past years, especially last year, where we had, you know, drivers that quit the morning of a bus route, brand new drivers then, you know, at the end of that school day. So buses have drivers, crossing guards have crossings have crossing guards. So none of us had to sign up for crossing guard duty this year. We were all ready. I still have my vest and stop sign in my office. But we were fully staffed. And so it was good news to start that way. You know, I visited every single school except one during the first 2 days of school. So that Thursday and Friday was, I was bouncing all over the place, and I was in a couple places twice because I got confused. But that was fine. It was more than welcome. And it just was really fun for me to be in and around our teachers and especially students again, just to feel the energy of what is very much a normal school year. And when I was at Irving, it was actually Chris Gosh, principal there. When I mentioned that, I said, this just feels good. It feels like a normal year. And she said, I think it feels better than normal. And that's probably right. We may be in a better space as we're launching this school year. Then on Friday last week, Dodke had a school-wide project launch with all students at one of 4 community partner locations all at the same time. So 170 kids, you know, 6 days into a school year, right? We're all out in the community. The community partners presented a problem or challenge to the students, and then the students are going to work in small teams to create solutions to that problem. So Dodke students will then present or pitch their solutions back to the community partners in October. And I want to thank the community partners that were part of this. So Aurora, West Allis, I went there myself with the students, and that particular challenge is helping them figure out better ways, new ways, different ways to communicate with our community about the opioid crisis, and in particular, the issues of synthetic fentanyl. The students, the presenters were emergency room doctors, emergency room nurses, and students all actually visited the emergency department. As part of it, I didn't have the time to do the whole walk with them, but our students were incredibly attentive to what this problem really is. So I'm very curious what solutions they come up with. The other partners are the Milwaukee Admirals, the West Allis Fire Department, and Wisconsin State Fair. So it'll be really interesting to see what students come up with. And then the big pitch day coming in October. And then a quick update for our community on the superintendent search. Again, I'm retiring at the end of this school year. So this evening, the board will meet in closed session and to share the results of the individual evaluation of 6 superintendent search firm proposals. And the goal tonight is the board will select firms to invite back for a short presentation and interview, which will take place on September 26th. And then also on the 26th, the goal is that the board would then select the search firm that you'll work with moving forward to conduct the actual search and the hiring for the next superintendent here. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you very much. So now I'll open up public comments for anyone who's watching via Zoom. If you have a public comment you'd like to give, you have 3 minutes to do so, and you must state your name and address before beginning. The board will not answer any questions, but if there is something that is brought up during the public comments that we can quickly answer, we will do that, but there will be no more back and forth discussion as usual. So there should be a link in the chat for those watching via Zoom. But we do have one person who signed up already, and that's Mr. Broadwell. So Mr. Broadwell, coming up.
Steve Broadwell, 12965 West Ohio Court, New Berlin. Our public school system, including this district, is a mess. You're okay with supporting the claim of a child as young as 5 that they are different than biological gender. You ignore science in the process, hiding behind an idiotic AMA proclamation rather than recognize this for the mental disorder that it is. I asked you for science, Smarty, in support of your nonsense, but you provided no answer because you know there is none. You force masks upon our kids against parents' wishes that have been proven to cause more harm than good as you seek to alleviate your own anxieties by sacrificing our kids' well-being. You promote a vaccine bribing kids with gloves and socks, which is insane as overwhelming evidence continues to emerge about the tremendous harm and inefficacy of these jabs to kids. You make our leaders study American-hating Marxists, racists like Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo in your woke journey to make everyone understand their big lie of what a racist country this is as you groom kids to become social justice activists. Kendi and those of his ilk fabricate the notion of systemic racism to meet the growing demand for this divisiveness that they themselves created. You voice support for a first grade teacher that hangs a BLM poster in a classroom citing the relevancy to her class project, while at the same time making life so miserable for an award-winning teacher because of his opposing view of that Marxist race pimping organization that he eventually resigned. You fail at responding properly and in a timely fashion to legitimate bullying at schools and punish disproportionately for bad behavior. Your suggestion that a child with disabilities who got beat up repeatedly by bullies at Lane could move to another school for his safety rather than removing the offender was awful, while simply saying sorry to the child's mom. You felt it best to uproot the harmed child from friends and mostly comfortable surroundings while letting the bully carry on with life as usual after a short suspension. You drove that family out of the district along with many others, including teachers that are sick of your leadership. You're okay with offering pornographic books for our high school kids like Out of Darkness that I read here previously, even after your review. That book discusses a girl's stepdad sexually abusing her, masturbation as a fix for that trauma, adult males training teen girls to give hand jobs, and at the end of the book, the stepdad finds out she has a boyfriend, makes his son tie the stepdaughter's boyfriend to a tree, then violently rapes the girl in front of him and tells the son to kill the boyfriend. He doesn't, so the stepdad beats him and kills them both. Then the son shoots the dad in the head. Great stuff. That is all instrumental in achieving the district's bottom 10% in state test scores as the trend in public education in this country continues its downward spiral.
All right, if there's anyone else who would like to make a comment to the board, now is the time to do so. I'll give 15 seconds. No one else has signed up at this point. So I presume if someone watching via Zoom wanted to, they were, but in case it came up late, give you a chance here. All right, seeing none, we'll close public comments at this time and we'll move on to item 9, board reports, starting with 9.1, a review of our board calendar. So today's September 12th at 6 p.m. We have our public budget hearing and regular board meeting, and immediately following we have our closed session meeting. On September 19th at 6 p.m. we have a workshop, communication and community relations workshop with school showcases, and recreation and finance workshop meeting, school consolidation workshop part 3. Then on September 26th at 6 p.m. we have a regular Board of Education meeting, immediately followed by a closed session meeting where, as Dr. Luxman mentioned, we'll be talking with the search firms that we narrowed down tonight. And then on Monday, October 10th at 6 p.m. we have a regular Board of Education meeting. Let's move on to our board committee report, starting with 9.2.1, life readiness through college and career preparation. Ms. Deal.
All right. So we actually did not meet this week, but we do have some updates for the board and the community. So the first update is we're still working on staffing and special education, but we have a plan to ensure all IEP minutes and services are covered. We have a lot of new enrollees this year who have high needs and a very large class in our early childhood program. So we're also making some long-term plans to meet everyone's needs in the future as well. Second update, teachers are signing up for a professional development cohort for the year before the end of the month. The choices are around increasing grit, growth mindset, curiosity, social awareness, and classroom effort, creating community partnerships, family engagement, and using digital portfolios for presentations of learning. And then third update, we have gotten a lot of positive feedback about our back to school schedule this year from teachers and administrators. They appreciated the balance of work time, planning as a school staff, and attending our district kickoff. We start our year with a lot of joy and positive momentum. That is my report.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Deal, her committee? Or any topics that you would like to be considered for future agenda meetings? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 9.2.2, our Communication and Community Relations Committee. Mr. Sikich.
Well, this report was supposed to be 32 minutes long, but I chopped it down to a minute and a half.
No, I will.
Our Communications and Community Relations Board Committee met on Monday, August 22nd. We discussed our strategic plan, annual success measures, and then our upcoming school showcases. And our first showcase is next Monday, the 6th or the 19th of September. That concludes my report. I didn't lie.
That wasn't a minute and a half.
Should talk slow. I'll have to talk slower.
Yeah, more breaths in between. Oxygenate. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Sikich or his committee regarding his report?
Do you know what schools will be presenting?
I do, but I don't have them in my notes.
Oh,
Do you know if it's like intermediate or elementary
I do
or
not.
anything?
I don't remember.
All right, we'll be surprised on Monday. No problem. Any things that you would like the committee to consider in the future? So Mr. Sikich, I did give you that handout that I'd gotten mailed regarding possibly looking at an annual report.
Yes, I'll bring that up.
So just something that we might look into sending out to everyone to kind of give them an annual update of what's going on in the district, even if they're not immediately involved in what's going on. So, okay, with that, we'll close that and move on to 9.3. Any board member reports of community events? Mr.
I would
Sikich?
just like to thank the board members that supported the West Allis Monogram Club with our chicken barbecue is this Saturday, and it's at the VFW Post on, I think it's Loomis Road. It's Ray and Dot's.
Yeah, I think it's.
fairly
Where is
hot-
it?
very
Where's it
hot-
Grange?
Grange, thank you. And our goal this year is to do 1,100 chickens. Well, half chicken.
Half chicken. So 550 actual chickens.
And it was nice, everybody that's on the board that purchased tickets all donated theirs to that.
Oh, very good.
So I thank you for your support.
Anything else? All right, we'll move on to our consent agenda this evening. We have item 10.1, the approval of the minutes from our August 22nd meeting. Item 10.2, our employment summary, and item 10.3, supplementary contracts. Does anyone need anything separated out? If not, look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. So move on to our action items this evening. 11.1, approve updated international travel for high school students to West Africa, spring of 2023. I believe we have Ms. Engelmeyer here. Over here, yeah.
Good evening. I just wanted to come back because thank you for having supported the Senegal trip. And we're still wanting to do the trip, but we're going to go back to use Forum, who we had traveled with last year, because we had traded to go with a different group. And then I had gone to an AATF, the American Association of Teachers of French group conference, and they talked about some experiences they had that weren't as high standard as I would want them to be for our students. So that's why we're going back with Forum. So they just said to come and present it again and to have Brian sign it since we have our new principal. And so that's why I'm here.
Right, it really is. It's more of a formality with the change, just because we want to make sure that if anything does go wrong, that we, dotted all the i's, crossed the t's, the board has approved exactly what the experience is intended to be. And so that's why it's back in front of you.
If I took French in high school, can I come?
You can actually, you're part of the community. You
Oui,
can.
oui.
Yeah, maybe.
Did you have a question?
No.
And the only question I have is, was there a change of cost at all in relation to this change?
This is going to be a little less expensive
Oh.
because the other one, they were supposed to come down in price and they weren't including the airfare. So that was part of it too.
Gotcha.
And it just, we're not going to be doing water, tubs of showers with that. We're not going to
Oh.
go that extreme
Oh,
in our cross-cultural experience. So, yeah.
any other questions? Look for a motion.
Move to
Motion.
approve.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you so
Have
much. And you guys
fun.
really are, it is open too, as the community. And we are going to have showers, hot showers, except for the desert. It's always cold in the desert.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
All right, let's move on to 11.2, approve board policy updates approved on August 8th, 2022 as a second reading. Dr. Lexman.
Yeah, so the board has the latest updates that were recommended from Neola. We did the first reading a month ago, right under board policy. So these have either gone through a board committee or the bylaws and administrative policies were a month ago. Had their first reading and approved the first reading and then they're held in committee for 30 days. So everything in front of you has been held for additional question or comment. And now they're all back in front of you for approval.
Were there any changes made from the first reading?
There were not.
Any questions or comments regarding the policies?
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. All right, that ends our portion of regular meeting today. So we'll take a 5-minute recess and then we'll reconvene in the executive session. So we are in recess. Okay, I'd look for a motion to move back into open.
So moved.
Second.
All right, roll call please.
Yes.
Present. Yes,
Present, whatever.
it's yes. Sorry. Ms. Steele,
Yes.
Mr. Burns,
Yep.
Mr. Becker,
Yes.
Mrs. Kaiser,
Yes.
Mrs. Carr,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mr. Keller,
Yes.
President Lee.
Yes. All right, so we just came out of closed session and we had a good discussion and we're ready to move forward with that.
All
So
right. So motion to move forward with decision as discussed in closed session.
Second.
any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, I look for motion to adjourn.
So move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.